Hello everyone and welcome. This is going to be video number 2 of the 3ds Max tutorial series. I'm going to be continuing with the interface today, as well as showing a couple other tools to use. I had forgot to show this middle bar here last time, so that's why I'm going to be continuing with the interface, and then after that I'll be doing a couple other things with modeling and showing a couple other tools. So in this little middle bar here, you have your Edit tab, your Tools tab, Group, Views, Create, Modifiers, Animation, Graph Editors, Rendering, Civil View, Customize, Scripting, and Help. And then in each one of these, you have your Edit, and this gives you different options to use in the scene, such as undo selection, redo, hold, fetch, delete, clone, move, rotate, scale, placement, transform, type in, transform toolbox, select all, select none, select invert, select similar, select instances, select by, which also will give you another subgroup, which would be name, layer, color, select region, which gives you a couple different options here: rectangular region, circular region, fence region, lasso region, paint selection region, window and crossing, manage selection sets, and object properties. Now, a lot of these little tools here have their own key bindings that you can use, such as undo, select, and redo. You'll never really go into any of these menus up top and use any of this stuff because, again, most of this stuff has key bindings that you can use. So most of it's not really used. Like, say, scale, you have a scale button over here. Move, you have a move button. Rotate, you have a rotate button, etc. The select all button, of course, selects everything. Select none will deselect everything in the scene, and select invert will select everything except for the selected objects. Select similar and select instances, I'm not quite sure what those do, so I can't really go over that too much. But select by down here will give you a name option, which will pull up this, and you can select it by name. So you could type in, say, for example, I have plane 001 at the bottom, so you can type in plane 001 and it pulls it up, and it'll kind of drop it down as you type. So say you want to start with an O, it'll first bring you anything that starts with an O, etc. And continuing on from there, you also have select by layer, which isn't giving me anything at the moment, but I believe select by layer just pops up with the layer option, which we don't have any layers in the scene. The next option is select by color, and color, of course, is what color you have the object set as. So say, for example, you want to select everything that's the gray color. Grab it, it selects everything in the scene by that color, which is in this little menu here, which I believe I showed in the last video, or I might not have, I'm not quite sure. But in this box here, it gives you color options that you can choose from. You can set them to whatever color. You can color code objects based on what they are. You can color code them based on how they look, etc. And select region just gives you, it's the same options as this little button right here. Your selection region, it just gives you different options to select certain things, like you have rectangle, circular, fence, lasso, paint selection. Lasso, of course, like say if you ever use Photoshop, it's the same type of concept. It'll let you click around, grabbing different things. Most of the stuff, again, you won't ever really use, but I wanted to go over it anyway. And the next one being manage selection sets. I don't really know what that does, but if we click it, gives this menu. Really don't know what any of this does, so I'm not going to touch it. And then object properties is next. Object properties pulls up this menu here. and you can kind of go through it according to what you have selected and change some of the properties, of course, of the object you have selected. Some that I like to use in this menu are see-through. When we click it, makes the object kind of see-through, and you can see through it, say if you have stuff behind it, etc. Or if it's supposed to be glass, you can set it to see-through and change the color to like white or something to kind of give it that glass sort of look. What else? Backface coal, edges only. A lot of this stuff you won't have to really touch. The only thing, of course, like I said, that I've had to use or ever used is see-through. Just for the sake of that sort of look, you know, hey, this is, say I'm making a light, this is supposed to be glass, and then behind it is your module, your emissive, etc. Then I would put it as see-through and make the color of it white and kind of give it that glass look, just to have it to look at, basically. Most of this other stuff you whenever used. Advanced lighting is for rendering. I don't ever do into rendering, so I can't really speak on that a whole lot. And user-defined properties, again, there's nothing in there, and I've never touched any of that, so I'm not quite sure how those work. And then moving on to the next menu, you have tools. Now, the reason I have this scene open here is to display and show you guys how one of the tools in this menu works. But I'm going to go through the list firsthand, and then go from there. So in the tools group, you have the Scene Explorer, Layer Explorer, Crease Explorer, All Global Explorers, Manage Local Explorers, Local Scene Explorers, Containers, Isolate Selection and Isolate Display Floater, Manage Scene States, Light Lister, Mirror, Array, Align, Snapshot, Rename Objects, Assign Vertex Colors, Color Clipboard, Perspective Match, Viewport Canvas, Preview, Grab Viewport, Grids and Snaps, Measure Distance, Channel Info, and Mesh Inspector. Now, most of this stuff, of course, has their own key bindings. Isolate Selection, you know, you can right click in the scene, Isolate Selection. You don't have to use this drop down menu. Most of this stuff, again, is never really touched. But the one tool that I do use out of this whole entire menu is Array. And Array I use when I make rims, which is why I have the scene open here. So when you click on Array, it'll pull up this little menu here. It can look kind of daunting at first, but I use it a lot when I'm making any sort of rims. Now, the way you would do this is you set up your part of the rim here. So the whole rim, for example, looks like this. And you'll want to grab a piece of the rim, make that one piece of the rim. Now I do have to apply symmetry to this first to flip it over, and then do the array selection. So let me do that first. And I've set this up a certain way so I can also show one of the tools in the Utilities tab as well, which is Reset Xform. So if I'm going to go in and apply symmetry, I'll always go in to my front view. I'm going to make this bigger using Alt-W, and then I'll grab it on the vertices here. These right here alone by themselves, because I do that because I've had issues in the past where things don't necessarily work or they don't flip over to the other axes right unless I go into vertice mode and grab these vertices. And these are you're only gonna grab the vertices that are on this outlying edge here. You're not gonna grab, say, all of that. You're just gonna grab your edge over here. And you can press F3 and make it see-through so you can see, because I do have this stuck into the box or the circle just a little bit. So you just grab all your edges here, and then to your modifier list, click it. You'll go down to symmetry, and let me find it. There we go, symmetry. Now we're greeted with this look. This is not how this is supposed to look. You go to Y, it screws up. You go to Z. Z doesn't do a whole lot. You flip it, it disappears. The reason for this is because the X form is screwed up. You're going to have to reset the X form of it. And the reason it does this is because this box, it's technically trying to mirror this over these edges here. And that's not how that really works. It's not supposed to work that way. So in order to fix this, you're going to want to delete your symmetry property here. Go back into what you were doing. Go to the Utilities tab. reset X form, reset selected with this selected, reset selected. It'll fix this box around it. Then you go back to your modifier list, make a new edit poly modifier, vertex mode. This will already be selected from the selection you had in the past, so you don't have to reselect anything. And now you're going to want to go down to symmetry, apply your symmetry modifier, and boom, it'll flip it. And then in this modifier, you got to be very careful with this, because press F4 brings up your edged faces. You got to be kind of careful with this for a couple reasons. The main one being this threshold little thing right here. Now for this, you'll always want to have slice along mirror and weld seam selected. And then once you apply the symmetry modifier, you're going to want to tinker with your threshold thing here. Now if everything welds together as it should, then you don't really have to touch it. But for example, if you have a rather small object in the scene and the threshold set to 0.1, it may come out looking like this, where it pinches all of this stuff together. You want to adjust this, if that is the case, to where none of this stuff is pinched together and screwed up looking. And now since I've kind of tinkered with it a little bit, of course I got to go back and check, make sure everything's as it should be. Everything looks good. Now these little vertices here, these are not supposed to be here. This is a result of applying symmetry. This happens sometimes. There's no way to fix it. There's no way around it. In order to fix this, we make sure, again, everything looks correct. None of these are pinched or anything. Nothing looks out of place. And the way I'm panning is using the middle mouse button. You click it up and down, left or right, however way you want. Alright, so everything looks good. Nothing looks out of place, out of whack. So from here, you'll then add another edit poly modifier onto here, which I've covered all these modifiers in the last video, I believe. And here, edit poly again, go to your vertex selection, and you'll just grab this vertex here, and there's one up top. And grab that one, holding Control, click and drag, and you select it. Now, Control, backspace will delete that. If you leave that one there, you technically have what's called an n-gon. And to explain an n-gon, basically means that you have a 5-sided polygon. Having this vertex here then splits this where it's at. So you have one side, 2 sides, 3 sides, 4 sides, 5. Having 5 sides isn't ideal. You want to model in quads and or triangles if the triangles convert back out to quads. The reason for this is for the sake of normals and how things look. If you leave this vertex here, upon exporting the object and putting it into Zmod, you'll have, or even any program for that matter, if whoever's watching doesn't use Zmodeler or has no idea what Zmodeler is, upon exporting regardless, you will have issues with this area here and how it looks and how it displays. It won't look right. It'll look like it's just kind of weird because it doesn't flow properly with the rest of the object. So you want to delete these. Just Control, backspace, deletes it. Easy peasy, it fixes it. Sometimes when you do this, it will delete, say it'll delete both of these pieces. For example, it may do that, it may not. All you'll want to do is just, if that happens, you go to your edge selection here. You go to the bridge modifier here. And what the bridge does is you'll grab one edge that's open and another edge that's open. Click it, it bridges it over. Now, you'll have to make a swift loop on with your edge modifier still, or your edge selection still selected. You'll grab the swift loop tool, which will then add a line or an edge into here. From there, you want to grab this here, and you're going to want to rotate a little bit around so you can see how you're working, what you're working with, because you don't want this to weld. And we're going to weld. If you don't know what welding is, I'll show you that here in a second, but you're going to want to move this up Because if we leave this down here where it's at and we grab this vertex and this vertex and we use the weld tool to attach them together, which it's not going to weld it because they're too far apart in the scene, so you'll want to use this settings button here and then just pull this button up until it pulls down. Leaving those where they're at will screw up this line here that we have. See, it just made this a little bit bigger, so it pulled that one down a little bit. It pulled this down and it met them right in the middle. You don't want that. In this instance, you don't want that. Some cases you do, but in this one we don't. So you'll just grab this one vertex and pull it up on the z-axis and kind of let them touch together with them touching together. Then grab it, weld it. And then you'll want to make a little slight edit to your thing here to give it a little more curve as it was to begin with, and then you're done. That's just the worst case scenario if it does delete things, which it does sometimes. So now that we've done that, we've covered the X-form tool and the symmetry. Now I'm going to apply the array tool that I was discussing to begin with. So in order for this to work properly, you first have to make sure that your pivot here is where it should be. So you'll go to your hierarchy tab here, affect pivot only, and then you'll want to reset your pivot on the y-axis, and you want it to be in the middle. I always will use a circle as a good basis and just place it right dead in the middle of the circle. Now this isn't exactly in the middle, but it's close enough to it. So you can move that down, put it wherever it needs to go. This is about where it needs to be, so we can work with that. You go to your Tools tab here, Array, and then in this tab, you're going to want to type in 360 in this Rotate tab here. You'll type in 360, enter, and then you'll click this little arrow right here, push it over, and that comes up to 3600 degrees. I'm going to actually get rid of that and make it just 3. Okay, and then from there we will press preview and it will circle around the object here. Now this isn't the way it's supposed to look. You also need to come over here to type of object and make it a copy. An instance will keep it all connected and you won't be able to edit it. Making it a copy will make individual copies of each one. Now you'll need to adjust your count because this is supposed to look like this. This, of course, does not look like that. So you want to adjust this ever so slightly until it comes to what you're looking at, what you're trying to get here. So we've got that, and I have made edits to this, which is why they're a little bit closer together right here, but that's okay. That's the way I need it to be. So from here, once you've made your edits, you've got everything as it should be, you click OK, and then you have your rim, or you'll have your rim here. Now, these will be individual objects, and you'll have to weld everything together. In order to do so, of course, again, same thing that we did when we were applying symmetry, you'll need to firstly grab an object, any of them, doesn't matter. Go to Attach, which is in your Modeling tab here. Go to Attach, click it, click it, click, click, and click. That attaches all of them together into one object. And you have to do that so that you are able to weld everything properly. Because if you don't, then you won't be able to weld it and it won't work. Everything has to be attached in as one object. Now you want to grab your seams here that you have to weld. Now following the same shape we had, so this was all together at first and this all came together. So we're going to grab all this here. Now we're going to leave this alone for right now because you have to weld these individually, because more than likely when I go to weld it, it's going to screw up what we've got here and it won't look right. So I'm going to leave this seam right here that I need to weld alone and do it by itself. But we'll leave this one alone too, since it's kind of misoriented. But we'll grab this one here, we'll grab this one, follow suit with the same thing. You grab the other side here, and if you need to see through it just to see what you're working with, just press F3. But I don't really need to. I know there's nothing behind it. But according to what you're doing, if there is, then you want to do that. So you know what you're doing, right? And you use Alt and mouse drag to deselect anything you have selected. We'll grab this. We'll grab this. But basically, you'll end up welding all of these together. But that's just, I just did this to show you how the array tool works in that selection menu. Continuing on from array, you have align, snapshot, rename objects, assign vertex colors, color clipboard, perspective, all that stuff that I've already went over. I've never used any of the other stuff, so I can't really go over much of it. I know that the Explorer is here. Basically just grab anything in your scene that you want, say all global explorers, and say container explorer, and it just basically pulls up what you have over here. You can select it here and it'll grab it over here as well. It's kind of useless, so I don't ever really touch any of that. Continuing on to your group, this is to group things together. I find it to be kind of tricky when you group stuff in 3ds, because when you group it together, I've found that I can't really ungroup it. I don't know why, but it won't work properly. So I never touch this. Same thing with the assembly thing. I never touched it. Can't really go over much. In your views tab, now your views tab you'll use quite a bit. The main thing you'll use is your viewport configuration, but I'll go over all of this stuff here. So you have undo view change, which will undo anything you've done in this configuration tab, and redo, which of course if you undo and you want it back, you press redo, etc. Redraw all views, really have no idea how that works, never touched it. Set active viewport, and this just basically does what you can do over here in this tab, changing all of this stuff. So again, it's one of those little shortcuts that are kind of pointless. It does the same thing here that you do in your scene. And then save active front view. Not sure how that works, but I would say it just kind of saves what you're working with right here and kind of freezes it, and then restores it when you save it. You can restore it and then work out of it again. Not quite sure though, so don't quote me on that. View cube is this little thing right here. This you can use to rotate around if you don't. If say your Alt key doesn't work and you can't rotate around with your Alt and middle mouse button, you use this to rotate around. You can click this to show it or unshow it, and it gets rid of it when you click it. And again, back to it, and you click again, show it, and it brings it back up. And you can also change where it shows up at. So if you don't want it in one view, you can click this and you can set it for whatever view you want. I normally don't ever touch it. I just leave it. You don't really notice it that much. You can set current view as home, front, reset to front, and you can configure it and how big it is with your size here, the opacity of it, etc. Bunch of stuff here, but I normally don't touch it. I don't really bother with it. But if you do ever want to get rid of it, you can just untick the option and get rid of it. Continuing on, you have steering wheels. I really have no idea what this is or what this does. I've never used it, never touched it. So, continuing on. Show materials and viewport as. I've never touched any of this. Again, this is more so for when you're rendering. Following to your X view, you have show statistics, face orientation, overlapping faces, open edges, multiple edges, isolated vertices, overlapping vertices, T vertices, missing UVW coordinates, flipped UVW faces, overlapped UVW faces, select results, see-through, auto update, display on top. A lot of this stuff I've never touched. Show statistics basically gives you your polygon statistics that are in your scene. You can edit this as well in your viewport configuration. When you click on it, you go to statistics and it gives you all these options here, which I'll go over in a minute. But continuing on, viewport background, you can change the background, all this here minus the grid, of course. You change it. If you don't like it being gray, you can change it to red, green, purple, orange, whatever color you want, or even a custom image, which you can do here. that's about it. Show transform gizmo is, where'd it go? Okay, so when you have this here, say you have anything selected, it would normally show up as this. You have this, which is called a gizmo, this little thingy here, which allows you to click and drag, snag stuff, etc. If you turn it off, which I don't recommend, but for people that do want to, you can. You know, there you go, it disappears. But I wouldn't ever really recommend getting rid of that, because you have to have it to move stuff around, rotate stuff, scale stuff, etc. Show ghosting, show key times, shade selected, and show dependencies. I have no idea what any of those four do, so can't really cover them, don't know what to do. Update during spinner drag, progressive display, again, no idea what they do. Expert mode, no clue, I'm not even going to touch it. It seems scary, so I'm not going to bother with it. Create, this is the same type of thing that you have over here in your create tab, so I'm not even really going to cover it, because everything you can do here, you can do over here in this tab, which I've already covered in the last video. So I'm going to skip this one. Your modifiers, oh, actually, speaking of modifiers, let me go back to viewport configuration and show you what's all in there. So in the viewport configuration in your views tab, you first start out with visual style and appearance. This gives you a couple different options to choose from. This mainly pertains to lighting and stuff when you're trying to render things, so that's not much you really want to touch in here. I would just leave it as it is. But you can change your edge faces, textures, transparency if you don't want to see it in your view here or any of your other views. You can tick these off. But again, one of those things I don't ever really touch. I don't really bother with it, so I wouldn't really recommend touching any of that. Background, I've never even been to this tab until now, so I don't know. Again, one of those things I don't really know, that I never use as well. Layout will give you different options to choose from how you want your viewport to be, so you can have it as one big one like how I have it now, which you press Alt W in your selected viewport if you want to make it bigger. You can have them two, running up and down, running left and right. You can have a little one and a bigger one, big one and a little one, so on and so forth, and they vary according to whatever you want. You can also make your own type of like custom thing here, how you want things to look. Safe frames, again, one of those things I haven't ever touched until now. Don't know what it is, don't know what it does, I'm not going to touch it. Steering wheels, same thing with the other thing in the menu, I believe in tools. I don't know what it is, don't know what it does, I'm not going to touch it. I've never touched it in my life. View cube, it's the same options you had in your views tab up here. Does all the same thing. You can there's a couple other things that it does show in here that it doesn't show in the other one, like snap to closest view, fit to view, and all this other stuff here. But it's one of those things I don't touch. I wouldn't recommend touching. Sometimes ViewCube does come in handy when you're trying to switch around your views, say look at your left view, your front view, etc. So I always leave it on, but you can turn it off like I said. Now, statistics. This is one that you use a lot. This again gives you all of these options that you have here. You can toggle your polygon count, triangle count, edge count, vertex count, and your frames per second, as well as the total, which is everything in your scene, your selection, which will be whatever you select in the scene, and your total plus your selection, which is, it's going to give you your total, and then it'll also give you what you have selected. I always have this on, and I always have these options ticked. Sometimes I'll use selection if I just want to grab whatever, just to see what the poly count is. But for the most part, I leave 1, 2, 3, and 4 on, as well as total plus selection. And for this to pop up, you also have to do show statistics in active view for it to even show up for you. So if I do that, it gets rid of it. But if I click it, apply, it puts it in the view. Ooh, hello. I can't click out of that. So, and then whichever one you flip over to, you can bring it up on here. Viewport configuration, show statistics in active view, apply, it'll put it in that one. It's whatever one you click it in, really. I always put it in my top left one, so I can just look up to the top left, boom, there's my thing. I normally work out of one viewport anyway, But when I need to come back and look at stuff, I can be over here looking at stuff like, okay, what's my poly count? And look up here. There's my polys, there's my triangles. Your triangles basically converts it over for you into how many triangles it would be. Basically, excuse me, a good way to know how many triangles you have is literally take your poly count and double it. Sometimes it's a little bit more, it's a little bit less according to whatever you're working with, but for the most part it's double, because a triangle will split a quad. It'll go from corner to corner of your quad. So say like on one of these, it'll go literally from corner to corner and just split it into a three-sided polygon. So I look at my poly count. If I don't have try selected and double it, and it'll be say 12,300 for example, or whatever it comes up to. But continuing in the viewport configuration tab. Past that you have regions, another thing I don't really ever touch, and display performance. Display performance can come in handy when you're trying to say bring in like pictures to look at to make stuff. Like for this rim, I used this picture that you see right here on the bottom to model it. I have of course rotated this up so I can move around and look at it better. But you can, if you ever have really bad quality textures that you bring in here, you just up this this box here to have many pixels you want, 1024, 2048, etc. These two I've never touched, of course. I don't ever really touch them. These are more so for when you're baking textures, rendering, so on and so forth, how you want your environment to look, stuff like that. Anti-aliasing just kind of smooths the edges and whatnot in your thing. I always just turn it all the way up, because if I'm ever trying to take screenshots, then I'll zoom out and I'll click out of the object and let it kind of smooth itself out, take a picture, and then boom, I'm done. This thing here, never touched it, not going to touch it. Don't really know what it does. And that, I believe, covers the viewport configuration tab. So continuing on with create, again, I've already went over that. I'm going to skip it. It's the same thing it does over here. Modifiers, these are kind of odd. I never really worked with them, but it basically applies the same modifiers that you would find in your modifier list, like hair and fur, conversion, turn to mesh, poly, patch, etc., mesh editing, so on and so forth, cap holes, chamfer, etc. It's kind of the same thing that you have here that you have over here, and I find this list to be easier, so I'm going to skip this one as well. A couple things in here though that are not shown in that modifier list, I believe, are cameras and radiosity. I believe that's about it, but these two things you never really touch unless you're rendering. I don't know what radiosity is or what it does, so can't really speak on that too much. Continuing, you have animation, and I don't do any animation, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this one, but this would be for any of you guys that want to do animation in 3ds Max, want to say rig up a gun to animate till I fire a bullet or whatever, or make a guy move or whatever, move his arms, legs, hips, etc. Then you would go to this tab and kind of do whatever you need to do. But I don't know what any of this stuff does. I'm not really going to touch it. Continuing on with graph editors, again, one of the things I've never touched until now. Don't really know what any of this stuff does, so I'm going to go ahead and skip it. Rendering, you of course will use this tab when you want to render things. I have used the render button, literally just the render button before, and it's according to whatever view you're stuck in, it will render the object. Say for example, I wanted to render this rim, so I'm going to go to Alt W, zoom in a little bit, and it's going to work off of how you're looking at it, and then go to rendering, render, boom, it renders it. I mean, it looks alright. I don't have any textures applied or anything, but that's kind of the basics that it does. I don't render anything in 3ds, of course, so I don't really know how much this can do, stuff like that. But for the most part, I never really touched this, except for just the render button up top. So I can't speak on much of this stuff. Civil view, again, I don't know what this does. I'm not going to touch it. Customize user interface. Tab, load custom UI scheme, save custom UI scheme, revert to startup layout, lock UA layout, show UI, custom UI and default switcher, configure user paths, configure system paths, units, setup, plugin manager, and preferences. The only one I've ever really touched is customized user interface. And this, if it'll pull up, I think 3ds just froze. There we go. This just kind of lets you customize what you see around your scene here. And you can change things like your keyboard, your commands, stuff like that, your hotkeys, your mouse, what your mouse does, your middle mouse button, etc. Your toolbars, which is what you see all around here. You can change what you have over here. Quads, I'm not quite sure what quads are or what they do. If anyone knows, of course, any of the stuff that I don't know, if anyone does know, feel free to leave a comment. Menus, this gives you all your stuff up here. These little things here, you've got this over here. You can add stuff to it, or you can get rid of things, rename it, delete it, etc. And colors, I'm not quite sure what colors really do. My best guess would be it just changes the colors of your menus or something. I really don't know. Continuing on, you have scripting and help. Scripting, I never touched it. I know it's if you want to load scripts into 3ds Max, like Yims Evo, a couple other things you can use. I know 3ds has a lot of different scripts that you can use to help yourself in modeling. I personally don't run any scripts. I don't feel the need for any of them. If I need to do anything, I'm going to do it in here the hard way. Just do it all myself. I know there are a few scripts to say make circles or whatever it might be in your objects. I know, I think that's called regularize, which makes it into a perfect circle. However many polygons you have selected, it'll take it, grab it, and make it into a circle, which can be useful sometimes, but I do things the hard way. That's just me. And then help of course gives you a bunch of help things, help scripts, a bunch of different help menus, a bunch of stuff, welcome screen, tutorials can be useful. I've used a few of them before. If you ever have any issues with 3ds itself, like the program's not working right, you go to 3ds Max help. What's new gives you a bunch of different things on what's new, what's been updated, etc. Now, I currently use 3ds Max 2016. I don't use 2020 or whatever. After 2016, they changed the layout. They didn't change what anything does, but they changed the overall look of 3ds, and it looks really bubbly to me, I guess. It looks kind of kiddish, toyish. I'd rather use this layout here. I know some people that use 2010. It's very old, but it all does the same thing. They never really add or remove anything from it. They just change the way it looks every year and maybe add one new thing. So I've stuck with 2016. 2016 has worked best for me. But the help menu, of course, kind of gives you a bunch of different things you can choose from if you need any help or need to find anything, services, support, etc. I believe that just about covers it for this video. We're hitting the 40-minute mark again. I don't want these to go over 45 minutes if I can help it. Again, I do like to explain things very thoroughly, so some things do, of course, take a little bit of extra time. I believe that covers it for this video. I've went over this extra menu here and also went over how to use the array tool, which is this one here, of course. Can't use it because the selection is empty, but the array tool right here. If that covers it, the next video is going to cover some basic 3D modeling techniques like chamfering edges, inset, stuff like that. So stay tuned for the next one, and thank you for watching.